The topic that we will be covering today is climate change and infectious diseases. The infectious agent life cycle is the process by which infectious diseases are spread through interactions between the agent, host, and environment. It can be split into steps known as the reservoir, portal of exit, mode of transmission, portal of entry, and a susceptible host. Each of these steps plays a key role in the general spread of diseases. The major types of infectious agents are bacteria, viruses, helminths, and protozoa, which are classified together as parasites, and fungi. We will be focusing on the first four today. Bacteria are diverse organisms that contain double-stranded DNA with no internal structures that most commonly reproduce through binary fission. The three most common forms of this bacteria are Bacillus, Coccus, and Spirillum, which are all based upon shape. Bacteria are most commonly split into two classes based upon cell wall structure, which determines how they respond to a test known as a Gram stain. This test ultimately identifies the bacterial infection through being either Gram-negative or Gram-positive. Viruses are not organisms as they do not have a metabolism and cannot reproduce, but their genetic material can be both single and double-stranded RNA and DNA, and they can infect all organisms. Both forms of replication between the DNA and RNA viruses ultimately manipulate the host cells, and disease in general is caused from this agent by disrupting normal cell function. Viruses are classified based upon various things such as shape, size, and genome type, which is referring to DNA or RNA. Protozoa are a single-celled parasite that, with the lack of a cell wall, are capable of quick and flexible movements. They are most commonly acquired through contaminated food or water or the bite of an infected carrier. Helminths are multi-celled invertebrate animals, but only some of which are classified as parasites. Since they are animals, their cellular makeup is very similar to humans, making them difficult to find an appropriate drug to kill. Most helminths reproduce through a multi-stage cycle in which most require some form of a host. Predicting the consequences of climate change on infectious diseases still remains a difficulty as it is continually surrounded by controversy and debate. It is ultimately very difficult to capture all responses of the infectious agent life cycle process from climate change, but studies examining these relationships continues to increase. One example includes the debate of human malaria, as one approach predicted expansion of this disease due to climate change will be balanced by decreases in the disease in other areas. However, another approach predicted that expansions of the disease will occur in areas of higher latitudes. Another example is that it was found that in ectothermic hosts and parasites with stages in which they are able to live outside of the host, the rates of these pathogens depend strongly on temperature. Although a framework that focuses on environmental variables in relation to temperature and the impacts of climate change on human diseases in certain species is in place, a larger and more longitudinal study is needed to expand this concept to larger ecosystems in hopes that one day solutions can be made to prevent these effects. The host-pathogen relationship is the dynamic through which a pathogen sustains itself within a given host. Within this relationship, there is consistent communication between the two, which ultimately results in one of the two outcomes: habitation of the host by the bacteria, or disease through host damage and replication of the bacteria. There are three types of this interaction, also known as symbiosis, between the host and the pathogen. The three types are mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Mutualism is when the host and pathogen work together. Commensalism is when one of the two benefit while one is unaffected, and parasitism is when one benefits and the other is negatively affected. It has been presented through various studies and research that temperature and other climatic variables do indeed affect the behavior, development, and mortality of infectious parasites and diseases. These effects can be difficult to fully manage and understand, so most commonly for infectious diseases, these effects are simplified down into the relationship between a host and a pathogen. It has been shown that warmer temperatures prove to have a wide variety of possible effects. For example, it can increase immune enzyme activity and bacterial resistance for insects, but warmer temperatures also aid in parasite growth and replication. These temperatures, along with variation in climate in general, can also decrease immunity within the host.
Hi, I'm Anastasia Glazer, and this slide is about the ecophysiology of host-pathogen interactions. The metabolic theory of ecology states that the metabolic rate of organisms is the fundamental rate that controls most observed patterns in ecology. It is based on an interpretation of the relationships between body size, body temperature, and metabolic rate in organisms. Smaller organisms tend to have higher mass-specific metabolic rates than larger organisms. This approach circumvents the need for detailed specific development and survival parameters by by using established relations between metabolism, temperature, and body size to predict responses to climate warming. Organisms that live better in warm temperatures by endothermy or by living in warmer environments usually have higher metabolic rates than organisms that live better in colder temperatures. MTE shows that this pattern is consistent from unicellular organisms to the largest organisms, and it is said to be the constraint that defines biological processes at all levels of organization. Community ecology, biodiversity, and climate change. Community ecology is the study of the organization and function of communities in a specific area. Biodiversity is the variety of life in our world. It is the many species ranging from microscopic unicellular organisms to large multicellular organisms. Places of low biodiversity are at more risk for death if a new pathogen is present. Climate change is the periodic difference in the Earth's climate due to changes in the atmosphere as well as biological, chemical, and geological factors. Climate change can cause pathogen extinction and the loss of their parasites, or it can cause pathogen organisms to be rid of their competition and flourish in their environment. Pathogens in large quantities can put entire host communities at risk. As mentioned in the article, the wider Caribbean region is a disease hotspot because of its warm waters that promote pathogen occurrence. The warmer climate makes it hospitable for these pathogens, which have destroyed coral reefs that are ecosystems for many species of aquatic life. Without their habitats, these species will most likely die. And these climate changes can be very harmful when the species affected by pathogens is a dominant species.
Next, moving on to community ecology, biodiversity, and climate change. First, I'm going to start off by defining two terms. Commensalism is a relationship between individuals of two species in which one benefits without affecting the other, and mutualism is a relationship between individuals of different species in which both benefit. So, looking at the question, how do rising temperatures affect commensal or mutualistic microbes? The paper cites an example of a mutualistic relationship found between coral and certain antibiotic-producing bacteria. In this specific relationship, the coral provides a place for the bacteria to grow, and in turn, the bacteria provides the protection of antibiotics for the coral. When sea surface temperatures rise, the growth of the bacteria are inhibited, resulting in a change in the microbial community of the reef where the relationship shifts from mutualistic to pathogenic. Commensal relationships between species are also vulnerable to pathogenic shifts due to rising temperatures. Also looking at the effect of biodiversity loss, biodiversity is nature's way of keeping a balance between species that coexist. Climate change can have a direct effect on biodiversity. For example, creating a loss of predators or more competition for food for disease vectors can increase the predominance of more pathogenic species.
Phenology is basically nature's calendar. It is the study of timing of the biological events in plants and animals, such as flowering, leafing, hibernation, reproduction, and migration. Some trends in species migration include the need for food, more favorable living/breeding conditions, and the search for warmer weather. When these species are migrating, they can carry and infect others with their parasites. Phenological changes and pathogenic life changes are affected by migration. Long-distance migrations can lower parasite transmission by making it possible for hosts to escape pathogens that accumulate late in a specific environment. The performance of parasites and host-parasite interactions are influenced by the parasite's ability to cope with extremes and their capacity to adapt to new conditions. This means that when species carrying parasites migrate to a different environment or climates, the parasites have to be able to adapt to the new environment's condition in order for them to survive. In humans, exposure to diarrheal disease has been linked to warmer temperatures and heavy rainfall. For example, in the Baltic Sea, long-term warming and temperature anomalies have been linked to increased diseases from Vibrio veneficus. Another example would be human mosquito-borne diseases like malaria and dengue fever. Building a mechanical understanding of climate diseases interactions allows for effective responses to new or expanding health threats.
Finally, we're going to look at outlook and future challenges, starting off with mechanistic models and drivers.
A mechanistic model is one that employs this idea that in order to understand how a system functions, you must first understand how each part of the system functions and relates to one another. The article proposes that in order to fully understand the effect of climate change on infectious diseases, we must include both mechanistic models and combine those with drivers such as precipitation, relative humidity, and extreme events. The article also talked about climate change and disease risk across different systems. The effect of climate change is easily seen in certain systems, such as within the coral reef, as discussed before. However, the challenge that exists with highly mobile species and with many human diseases is the difficulty in identifying signals of climate change. Long-term studies that have both a forward approach to research while also establishing a repository for things like DNA or physical specimens could be used in different manners as technology advances and could help lead to further understanding and possibly answers. The article also talked about climate-disease interactions and their implications on other aspects of climate change. So climate-disease interactions also has a direct effect on other aspects of climate change, such as the ability to grow and produce nutritious food, water quality, quantity, and supply, population displacement, and conflict. And this directly affects the burden of infectious diseases in many societies.